Maybe let me start by thanking the conveners for organizing this Zoom session. It's really great that we still have the opportunity to present here like this. I also would like to kind of acknowledge all of the co-authors. So this was a huge group effort within EUCP. So thanks to everybody who contributed to that. So I'm going to talk about a comparison of different methods to quantify uncertainty in projections of future European climate. So if we talk about uncertainties in model projections of future climate, we normally distinguish three sources. So we have like scenario uncertainty, model uncertainty, and internal variability. And it has been shown, as you might will all be aware of, that the relative difference is very much dependent on the variable, on the lead time, and on the region, and so on. So over the years, there's been a range of methods developed in order to constrain the model range. And this is just some examples of some methods to constrain regional uncertainty in regional climate projections. Now, if you wanted to compare the results of these methods, you might run into some problems. So it would be a little bit like comparing apples and oranges, to take this picture. And that is because there's no real coordinated framework for comparing these methods. Now, if you pick two studies, they might focus on a different variable, on a different region, on a different time period. They might use different model pools or different ensemble members. Or nowadays, they might even use different model generations like SNP 5 or SNP 6. And they might focus on different uncertainties. So one study might focus only on force changes, another one might only focus on internal variability, and like using a large ensemble of a single climate model. But there's also less obvious differences. Like even if two studies focus on the same variable, same general region, same time period, they might differ in the exact domain they use. Like one study might use an asterisk region, the other one might use some slightly different region. And this might kind of hinder a direct comparison. Similar with like if you have horizontally resolved results, the grid resolution, so if these differ. Also, even if two studies kind of look at end of century changes, the reference period might differ, and again, hinder a direct comparison. And finally, what I came up with was the reported results in the literature might change. So one study might report a mean value, another one might report a median value. So this would then not be directly comparable. So in our work, this is why we came up with this kind of framework. So we aimed to be as inclusive and as consistent as possible in order to allow a quantitative comparison between a range of different methods. And maybe I should say, like, I guess consistent is pretty clear, but what do I mean with inclusive? So we have quite a variety of methods, and not all of them are able to deal with all kinds of different variables or regions and so on. So we're trying to actually not do something complicated, but do something rather simple in order to maximize the number of methods which are able to contribute. So what you see on this slide is basically what we came up with. So we're looking at summer temperature and precipitation change for the middle of the century relative to 95 to 14. We're focusing on 8 different regions in Europe. And these regions represent kind of 3 different spatial domains. We have the full European region, we have the 3 European asterisk regions, and then we also have to test out the methods and kind of push them to where they might even fail. And we look at 4 grid cell regions without any spatial aggregation. And you can see that on the left-hand side in the plot. We use models from SIMIP 5, forced by RCP 8.5 as far as possible. They have a 2.5 times 2.5 grid resolution, and we ocean mask them using the grid cell center. So this is kind of the basic setup. And then we have 8 methods contributing in this case. I'm not going into any detail here for the sake of time. So if you have any questions, you can maybe ask me later or drop me an email. Here I'm just going to divide them into 4 quite broad groups. So that's the first 2 are weighting schemes. Then we have the third one is a detection and attribution based method. Then we have 2 Bayesian methods. And the last 3 are kind of single model methods, again, which only focus on internal variability using large ensembles. So that brings me already to the kind of result part of the presentation, and I will present 2 examples to kind of show what we do, and we're always gonna show unconstrained and constrained distributions. So for each method, we have an unconstrained and a constrained one. The unconstrained one is the lighter one in the background, and the constrained one is the one in the foreground, a bit darker, as you can see in the top left corner. And we're, in this case, reporting these 5 percentiles as indicated. So this is one example for the Klimburg method. This is the unconstrained distribution. And then we can add the constrained one. In this case, the constrained one is very, very similar to the unconstrained one. And then we can add the other ones. These are all of the multi-model methods, so the methods which also include model uncertainty. And then we also have the single model methods which only focus on internal variability. For the sake of this talk, I'm actually only going to focus on the multi-model methods. So that's the one on in the right part of the plot. So if we focus on these, we see that for this case, and this is, maybe I should say this is on the largest domain, so all of Europe, and summer temperature change. So what we see is actually there is quite some disagreement across the methods. So to just get into a little bit of detail, the REA method here actually shows a shift upward from the unconstrained distribution and also a narrowing of uncertainty. But then there is other methods which actually also narrow uncertainty but shift the distribution a little bit downward compared to the unconstrained one. And then, as I already mentioned briefly, there's the Klimburg method in this case, which actually doesn't change the distribution. So these are kind of 3 things that are happening here. So this obviously needs some deeper looking into these methods and in order to be able to explain why these differences exist and where they might come from. And I will talk about this in a minute. Maybe one other thing that you might have noticed. So also the unconstrained distributions, they differ between the methods. So that's the light boxes in the back, right? And this has several reasons. So for the multi-model methods, we use CMIP5, but we use different subsets for each of the methods in this particular plot. And we did this here because we wanted to use all of the available information for each of the methods without restricting them too much. And the other reason here is that the UKCP method, that's the one in red, with the largest spread by far, this actually includes also additional uncertainty from perturbed physics ensembles. So this is the reason kind of here why the unconstrained distributions differ as well. So here we try to get rid of this problem by only focusing on 4 of the CMIP5 methods, and we actually restrict them to use the same 29 model runs. And for this case, most of the unconstrained distributions are now identical. It's only the HIST-C method which has slightly narrower unconstrained distribution. And this is because for HIST-C, actually already the unconstrained distribution does not include internal variability anymore, while the other methods still include model uncertainty as well as internal variability. But maybe a bit more encouraging, if you now look at the bottom 2 panels, I think from the other speakers that you can't see the mouse, but I'm referring to the Central European and the Mediterranean 2 regions. You can actually see that there the method agreement is quite high. So in Central Europe, you see that all 4 methods which we show here agree that in terms of in a reduction of the spread and also in a slight shift downwards. So the warmest kind of changes are less probable, so to speak. And similarly for the Mediterranean, where actually also most of the methods agree. So 3 out of the 4 methods agree on this shift downwards and on the reduction in spread. This is a bit different if you look at Northern Europe. Very similar to the case we had before. We actually have 3 different things that's going on. The REA method shifts the distribution slightly upwards. HIST-C and the ASK method shifted slightly downward, and Klimburg doesn't really shift it at all. So again, this is a very unclear signal here in Northern Europe, and that also subsequently leads to a bit of an unclear signal in all of Europe. So this raises the obvious question that I already posed: why do these methods differ? And in the paper, we go into quite a bit of detail discussing the different things that can make the methods differ. Here I'm just really quickly summarizing them and have talked about some of them already. So different model pools might be one reason. the uncertainties included in methods might be another reason. So we have forced response, internal variability, perturbed parameter uncertainty, which are handled differently by the different methods or even not included in some of the methods. And then there is some other things which are more fundamental to the methods themselves. That is, for example, the underlying assumptions that the methods make, or also what lines of evidence the methods draw on. So I've called this informing fields here. So a method might use only a single variable and might use spatial information of this variable to inform the constraining. And another method might use a whole range of different variables and might use time series information. So this is actually quite different kind of lines of evidence. So maybe not even surprising that the methods differ in certain regions. So the final slide, how can we choose between these methods? Like given this kind of divergence in some regions. And I mean, I guess for the sake of, for the time being in this talk, the answer has to be, it depends. So one thing we can do is we consider the context. So what do we actually need this distribution for? Are we only interested in a best estimate, or are we interested in a worst case scenario? So in many cases, the median estimates across the different methods are actually in better agreement than the spread is. So in this case, if you're only interested in the median, it might be less crucial which a particular method you pick. Similar for regions. So if you're interested in a region where all of the methods agree, it might be less crucial which method you pick. This is very different if you look at a region like Northern Europe, where all of the methods are kind of diverging a little bit. Then you have to really consider and really think about what you want to do and what you need. The last 2 points are more of a broader vision and maybe less direct recommendation to users. So one thing we could do is we could combine all of the different lines of evidence from the different methods and basically develop a new method which draws on all of them, and maybe is then kind of a super method which draws on all of these different variables and so on. This might be a lot of effort though. And finally, one thing we could also do is we could select a method in a region based on some objective measure of skill, so kind of using only the best method, for example. This would require some objective skill measure, obviously, which could be provided by a coordinated perfect model test, so similar to what we did in this work, but then kind of use this perfect model test to estimate some skill measure. And this seems to be a promising way forward, which we are currently working on, and hopefully we'll have some results on this soon. And with that, I'm done. And I'm happy to take any questions. So the paper currently is submitted to Journal of Climate.